Okay, so today we're going to talk about when, where, why, and other things related to applying code to solve a problem or not applying code to solve a problem within Dynamics 365. Most of this will actually translate into a lot of the other things, other versions of CRM. If you're, like say, 2016 and in some cases 2015, 2011, some of it, yes. So, a couple announcements here. This is how you get a hold of me. So email, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do so. Because the way that this all works is I use Click Dimensions to actually do all my work, all my emailing, things like that. Sometimes there's a delay of getting the data out of GoToWebinar. It's like the webinar I had 2 weeks ago, it didn't show up, and then I went out of town, so I actually have not emailed everybody. But I'll always put the videos up on YouTube or the recordings up on YouTube. So if you subscribe, you'll get notification that I've done that. So that'll be up later today. Then I'll email everyone what we're doing today, along with some notes and stuff that we'll have toward the end. So that'll go out as soon as everything kind of synchronizes up, which will probably be tomorrow or Monday. But anyway, so if you don't mind, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel just so that you get notifications and things. So as always, you're muted so that everybody has a good learning experience here. And if you need to speak, you can just raise your hand with the little thing in the B section there, or I'll just put it into the question box, whichever one you want. So we had a small survey today, and it looks like the numbers are in 65% of you are on Dynamics 365, 13% is on 2016. 13% is on 2015. No one's on 2013, and 9% are on CRM 2011. So that's very interesting. Thanks for taking the time to fill that out. I am going to be at the CRM UG conference in Nashville. I've got a couple sessions I'm doing. Then other than that, I'm just kind of wandering around, which is what I do best, quite honestly. Everybody who knows me knows that. So hope to see you there. If you're there, please look me up and say hi. Also, Snapshot, my documentation tool, is getting ready to release. So I'm going to put a line in the sand and say I'm going to ship it on Monday, August 7th. So it's been quite a long time coming. I've got a lot of changes to it, a lot of new reports and features. I've totally redone just about everything as far as what the reports look like and the output and things like that. So keep an eye out for that. When it ships, I'll email everybody so you know. So getting started, this is a quote that I cannot exactly attribute back to Einstein. He said something like this, but this is what I've always heard, and I'm going to stick with it. So this is something that if you're not used to learning and you're in the technology business, then you should get used to it by now. So there's not a day that goes by that I don't learn something new, and that's just kind of a habit at this point. In fact, I think I've mentioned it before. I've got an article half written where I discuss the idea that is learning addictive. So anyway, so everybody should be learning new stuff, especially with the rate that the product team is shipping things. So if you did not know, we have a new update coming sometime. It's called the July update. But since August starts next week, it may be the August update, but they're calling it the July update. So that should be coming soon. As soon as that hits, I'm going to have a whole host of webinars and stuff. Speaking of that, I'm going to email everybody probably today or this weekend another query to find out what topics we want to discuss. And then I'll build that into my calendar for the next 2 or 3 months, probably the end of the year is what I'm going to work on in that. So expect that this week too. Okay, so the first question that we're going to talk about is when we apply a type of solution. So one of the first things that you have to ask yourself is the question of immediacy. Believe it or not, that's actually a word. At least it doesn't come up in spell check as being bad, but this is what I've always used. So the question is, does the user need to see something happen? So when they do something on a screen, should it reflect other parts of the screen? Should they be changed dynamically? The biggest one is you make a selection, say on a drop down list or an option set. Should things show or appear or disappear based on that? Or if you have a calculated field that you're doing in code instead of the actual calculated field, should we see that immediately? If not, can the user wait to see the whatever it is when they push the save button? Okay. Does the user need to be involved in the conversation? So what that means is if I'm doing something behind the scenes, does the user need to know if it worked or not, or do they need to see the results of what I do, either with an error message or anything else? So that's when I say involve the conversation. This is discussing asynchronous versus synchronous. Synchronous means the user is involved in the conversation. Asynchronous, mostly applied to processes, happens behind the scenes at some point in time in the future, immediately or soon thereafter. So these three things kind of help you guide your decision on what to actually use, what technology to use. Another question is, do we have to make modifications by non-developers? Maybe you are the non-developer or your staff is non-developer, depending on what you're doing. So do we have the personnel, again, this could be you or it could be people you work for, with, or work for you, do we have that level of expertise to actually create and maintain a solution? Or the secondary question is, once it's deployed, who will make changes? Does it require a developer to make a change, or can a non-developer, say a power user, or what the new phrase is, the citizen developer, can they make the change to whatever solution you're working on? The next question is, does this operation need to occur every time an action is taken? Or is there ever a point where something needs to happen in the future, but we want to manually fire that off? That is the difference between creating a solution using either JavaScript or a plugin, which is every time, or an on-demand workflow that is executed manually. Plugins always get executed. Workflows can be executed when something happens or manually, and workflows are pretty much the only thing like that, besides pushing a button on the ribbon. That's the difference there. So if it ever comes down to, well, we want this to run sometimes but not other times, that's probably a workflow more than it is a plugin, because it's easier to change. You can do it in a plugin, but you have to define your criteria for execution up front, and you have to know that, and if it changes, you have to modify the plugin. So now let's talk about where. So here are the technologies we're going to be discussing today, and they're kind of listed in the order that you may encounter them. So if you start off with just being an administrator or a power user, citizen developer, things like that, you might work with business rules, synchronous and asynchronous workflows. Then you might get into some JavaScript, Microsoft Flow, and PowerApps. And finally, when you are a true developer, you can get into the plugin model. So this will not apply to everyone, of course, but this is just kind of generally how things would work. And again, your mileage will vary, so just keep that in mind. So let's talk about why. Does an out-of-the-box feature do the job? So for years, we did things like created roll-up fields that we did behind the scenes with the plugin, or even JavaScript sometimes, calculated fields as well. So I can't tell you how many times I've actually created a roll-up or a calculated field inside of a plugin. With the advent or the addition of calculated and roll-up fields to Dynamics 365/CRM, we eliminated that feature, and I was able to, in many cases, eliminate the code for a customer where we were using those things. Now, that being said, there are still things out there that require roll-up or calculated fields based on business logic. You can either do it yourself, you can get a package like the North 52 functions. So that's a commercial package you purchase, so it really kind of depends. So where possible, use the out-of-the-box stuff. The same for form configuration. You can use JavaScript or business rules to show and hide items on the form, but in some cases you need to do that programmatically. So use configuration where possible, and use programmatic access where not. Field level security is another one. So you can configure the ability to show or hide the contents of a field based on the person and the security level assigned to them, or you can use JavaScript or a business rule to show and hide things. Field level security is actually a more better, that's good English today. There's a better option for many things, strictly because it allows you to do it at the system level instead of doing it on the form. Hiding things doesn't necessarily hide them from a user who really knows how to get to it. So just keep that in mind. Is the task within my skill set? So if you look back at these, what are we doing here? Okay, do we have things that we're doing that I know how to do? Okay, so I can do business rules. That's just drag and drop, pick a few things. Workflows I've been working on. I can do dialogues, I can do workflows, I can create business process flows. All of these things I can do. JavaScript is next on my list to learn, and Microsoft Flow, and I didn't put the PowerApps and stuff like that. That could be next as well. Plugins is kind of a different thing. Like I said, we'll talk about that toward the end. What do I want to be when I grow up? That's the next question. So, assuming that you have a learning path defined, and we had a webinar a few weeks ago about that, what of these things do I really want to learn? Okay, what is going to help me either do my job or increase my value to the organization, increase my skill set for the job market? What of these things do I really need to know to do my job? So these are the things you need to consider. So let's talk about business rules. So the idea of a business rule is Microsoft wanted to give us the ability to do codeless modifications of the form without ever having to write JavaScript. So they're pretty easy to create. There's no JavaScript required. They can run at either the record, the form level when the record is opened, or at the server level. It supports multiple devices and platforms. So basically, they run on all of the platforms, which is really cool. Some of the limitations are how they run. One of the things I do not like about it is they do not have any checks for environmental conditions. One of the things we can do with JavaScript is we can say, oh, if this is a create form, in other words, someone has pressed the new button, I can execute a piece of JavaScript. Or if it's in an update mode, I can execute a piece of JavaScript. We don't have that with business rules. They run pretty much all the time. You can do conditions, but they're based on field values. So that's just kind of the problem I have. So basically, here's some more limitations. Whole number fields, how it works on tablets. Some of these may have been updated recently. And then things like the last one there, say I want to pull out the text value of a lookup field, things like that. Some of these things just you're going to have to drop back to JavaScript for. You just cannot do with business rules. The other thing is kind of the product team kind of has a really bad habit of doing is they get a feature going and it's good enough and it works, and then they don't modify it again for a very, very long time. And business rules are like that. They haven't really, once they kind of ship business rules, they really haven't made that many limitations to them, any additions to them. The biggest thing that they've done recently is just change the editor, which is great. It's a better editor and it's easier to understand, and it's kind of, you can see where they're going with kind of a singular way of doing things to all the editors themselves. So hopefully they'll add some more stuff. It's just not on par with JavaScript. And like I said, it's only a few things that they're really kind of missing. It shouldn't be that big a deal for them to add, but they still have to do it. So any questions on business rules before we get into workflows? Nope. See there? Okay. Tool asks which one's preferable, business rules or JavaScript. We'll get in that in just a minute. So when working with workflows, my number one tip is let somebody else do the hard work. Okay. So we have two different types of things that are built into the system that allow us to actually add new stuff and perform things that are not normally part of the way we do stuff. So the major things that you can do with workflows is create records, assign records, update records, delete records, etc. We have custom actions that were introduced in 2016 and Dynamics 365, which allow us to actually perform other things. One of them that's actually kind of interesting is the qualify lead action. Prior to 2013, when you qualified a lead, it would pop a dialog box up and it would say, I would like to create a lead, a contact, an account, and an opportunity, and you could choose which ones you wanted. With 2013 and above, you lost that capability. So when you click the qualify lead, it will actually create all three and then open the opportunity. Well, what if you didn't need that? So a lot of people, they don't want to create an account or a contact. So there is actually a action called qualify lead that allows you to specify which ones of those three things you want to happen. Now it happens behind the scenes, so you don't actually see it visibly, but it does happen. So that's one of the things that are built in that's pretty cool. Custom workflow activities. Here is some, and again, I'll put this in the show notes that I'll email everybody later. But there are several packages. These are all by MVPs, by the way, and this is how you get a head start on adding new functionality to your system without having to write the code. Somebody else did it for you. So again, this goes back to my tip: let somebody else do the hard work. So Jason Latimer has created a series of activities. Kind of bucketed together an email string, numeric, and date and time. Demian has actually created a whole bunch of just kind of a wide variety of tools. I added to that some of the things that I had in my toolbox that I wasn't going to end up selling, so I gave it to him, and he added to that code base. And then Andre has actually created a similar thing called the Ultimate Workflow Toolkit that he released recently that has another bunch of things in there. So all of these, and then there are commercial solutions like the North 52 I mentioned earlier, that allow you to do things programmatically, but not having to write the program. So this is a really cool way for you to extend the functionality to yourself and your users without actually having to write the code. When you get into writing the plugins, we'll talk about it toward the end. That's where you can actually add your own value by creating your own custom workflow activities, which are a type of plugin, by the way. Siva asks, how do I create a marketing list? There's a workflow already done for that. Marketing list is just a type of thing. Okay, so that's just a record type. Populating a marketing list is different. So you have to use, I know for sure the Dynamics 2016 Workflow Tools has it because I added it. That was one of the things that I added. So you can programmatically add stuff with that. Okay. So let's talk about JavaScript for a second. So any questions on any of the workflow stuff that we covered? Nope. Okay. So let's talk about JavaScript. So in my opinion, JavaScript is the most utilitarian of all of the technologies we work with. It's also the most versatile. It is fairly easy to use compared to some of the other things that are out there, but it is development. So you do need to know how to do programming, okay? You use it on forms or from ribbon buttons. So a ribbon button has one of two actions. One is to open a URL or launch a URL, and the other is to actually execute a JavaScript function. So you have to use it if you're adding code to ribbon buttons. There's lots and lots of great examples and samples in the community. There's libraries out there to help you do things. There's blog articles that have specific things out there. So there's lots of stuff to help you learn JavaScript. I have stuff that on my site that is walkthroughs of JavaScript. So you can use those, of course. But anyway, sooner or later, you're going to need to learn JavaScript, I think. I don't think we're ever going to get away from that, strictly because of just the usefulness of it. So it does things that you just cannot do within the business rules. Business rules have just a very finite amount of things that they do. JavaScript, you can do pretty much anything you can think of. So we have a very robust API with the XRM.page model. When the July release ships, we're going to have even more functionality. So one of the cool things that I have been asking them for years was, can you please add CRUD operations to the JavaScript model? Okay. So the CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete. So there's 5 things that we do within JavaScript all the time. And when you get to specific levels, we create records, we update records, we delete records, we associate records, we retrieve records, and then the 6th one is we retrieve multiple records or do a query. There, in Dynamics 365, I think that's when it first shipped, they added a model for offline access that gave us that. Why they didn't do it for the online access, I have absolutely no clue, but they did not. But in the July release, if you look at the documentation that's on the Microsoft site, that is coming. So they now have an offline and an online version of that, which will allow us to actually do database updates directly from their object model without having to have a third-party object model built in or imported into the system. There's several that are out there that allow us to do the things that I mentioned, plus some. So XRM Service Toolkit is probably the biggest one out there. A couple of different spellings of that, a couple of different toolkits. But having it built into the product is just kind of the way to go. And what's so funny about this is that technology has been there forever. I mean, literally since probably that they shipped to CRM, but they just never expose it to us, because the way it works is if they ship something and they have to document it, and if they document it, they have to support it. That's what the issue is. So if you ever look at the internal functions that we're not supposed to use, they're just some really cool, fascinating stuff that's been in there for years that we don't have access to. Okay, so let's talk about Microsoft Flow. How many people, can I see a show of hands, how many people actually have used Microsoft Flow with Dynamics 365? A few? Okay. Okay, great. There's a few people. So Flow is the way to automate connections between different things. So you can work with files, you can notifications, get data, send data, etc. Whoops. Here are the connectors. So as you can see, this is all of them right now. I had a webinar last summer, I think it was about a year ago, and it was probably half of this. So as you can see, we have popular connectors to connect all the Microsoft stuff, and then there's everybody else. And it's everything from file systems such as Dropbox or Box or OneDrive to SharePoint, Dynamics 365, of course, for both CRM and operations, and then just about everyone in between. I did a demo the other day, and I need to finish writing the blog post on this, but there is an internet-enabled button called a Flick, F-L-I-C, and it has a companion app that runs on your iPhone, for instance. When you push the button, it uses Bluetooth to connect to the phone. Well, they also have a Flow connector, which is right here, right there. So what I did is I created a flow that when it was clicked, I connected to my Dynamics 365 system, and I had a custom activity that I had created, what I call the easy button, like the Staples commercial, if you don't know what that is for those people here in the States. So my easy button, when you clicked on it, it created an easy button record for a specific thing. That was also tied into the gamification system, and it added a point to the thing we were associated with. The concept being, if you've ever been to a store that has on the way out some way for you to visibly show your support for somebody doing a good job. Home Depot here in the States and many places has a bell you can ring. Several airports I've been in, and actually other places actually have in the restrooms on the way out. There is two buttons, a good button and a bad button that you can actually push to actually say that you had a good, or like the bathroom was a good bathroom experience or a bad bathroom experience, and vice versa. So there's all kinds of things like that. And what these things do is allow us to actually keep track of comments from people just by the click of a button. Okay, and again, so I clicked the button, it actually ended up creating an activity within Dynamics 365, which was used by gamification to keep count of how successful the store was, for instance, that we were modeling. And so that's just a kind of a really quick example, but you can do everything in between. Okay, so all kinds of things from, like I said, from file systems to SMS to text systems, everything. So this is a way to connect your system to to other systems. So lots of stuff built in lets you do things. So this is a way for you, especially if you're using CRM online, it's a no-brainer. If you're on premises, it's a little bit of a different. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about PowerApps. So PowerApps is an application builder that allows you to use a visual designer to create an application without actually writing any code. Now, they've been working on it for quite a while. It's not the same as writing a mobile app. Now, and the reason I say that is because the primary use that I have seen with PowerApps is to create a mobile app. Mobile application development is hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life, and I'm old. Okay, I've been doing this for, I couldn't tell you how long. Well, I could tell you, it's not relevant. A long time. Creating mobile apps is very difficult, strictly because there are more factors to consider than you would think. And so the ability to quickly create an application that will allow the user to view data, enter data, and send data up to a server is very, very high. And you can do it very quickly. The cool thing about it is when you create the Power App, it will work on your desktop, on your mobile device, or on the web. All three. It's the same code base. Looks exactly the same depending on the form factor. Okay, so it's a really cool way for you to create what they call application or domain specific functionality. So I want to be able to pull something out of Dynamics 365 and update it and push it back up. Very, very simple. So there's plenty of examples to show you how to do that. Or maybe I want to pull data out of SharePoint and do something with it and then push it into Dynamics 365. What PowerApps does is it gives you the interface. Almost all of the actual data movement is actually done with Microsoft Flow. So you have PowerApps on the front end, Flow on the back end, and then your data source from either SQL or one of the things you see here. So this is just a few of the things it works with. Jim asks, is there anything in the legacy workflow engine can do that the MS Flow cannot? Jim, that is a great question, man. I think the biggest difference is between working with Flow and PowerApps and the workflow engine within Dynamics 365 is within the workflow engine, you're just inside of CRM. Now you can write custom activities, custom workflow activities to actually communicate outside the system. But the main thing is you're working inside the system with data that's in there. The power, I think, of both PowerApps combined with Flow or just Flow by itself is the ability to connect with non-CRM systems or non-dynamic systems. So again, you could have an example of using a Flow to send a text message. So you can create something happens within the system, within Dynamics, that you want to actually send a text message based on, again, whatever happened. So that's a good way to do that. Or maybe you put a file in or things like that. So realistically, I don't know if there's anything that is not done, but what I have found working with Flow to do things, I'm not going to say it's clunky, but it's a little bit more work to do stuff than I would like. Whereas the stuff like when you create a record, you can create a record without a problem using Flow and even PowerApps to create a record in Dynamics. The biggest thing is it's a little bit easier sometimes to do it within CRM because you're pulling within the workflow editor because you're pulling things in. But that's a great question. Let's see. Can the connectors replace Scribe? I have an integration environment. The Scribe was recommended instead of the connector. The big thing about the connectors and Scribe is very purpose built. So Kingsway Soft has an SSIS connector that does a very similar thing. So these things are mainly used to do very specific things. You could probably do the same things with Flow, but I would really be concerned with the volume. If you have lots of volume, you need a solution like Scribe or SSIS to actually handle the volume. I don't know if Flow is a high volume app or not. I know it does have limitations for how many how many activations or executions you get on a monthly basis without having to pay for them. Whereas if you have a scribe, you pay for it, once or with a subscription. So it kind of works like that. So you've been asked, how would I eliminate creating an opportunity for certain users when they're qualified lead? Ben, that goes back to that qualified lead action. So go explore that, and you can see what I'm talking about. It basically allows you to specify what to create, what not to create. Then from there, you just have to put a condition around that. And no, there's no way to get the old prompt back. That's just taken out of the system. Charles asks, could Flow potentially replace the workflow engine one day? I don't know, man. That's a good question. If you look at the information that was part of the airlift, they're not using that term, the executive briefing for the July update, we can now execute or design flows directly from inside of Dynamics 365. I haven't seen a working version of that yet, but what we have is the ability to do that. I don't know if they're going to replace it. I think it's a possibility because, they come out with new designers for everything but workflows. So it is a, supposition that the reason they haven't done it is because they have flow in the back end. Now, that will probably not fix things for like people who still have on premises, but since most people are going to the cloud these days, maybe that's a way of doing it. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. I would imagine that the way it looks. So if you think about the possible transition here, we have the ability to do workflows right now. We've had it for years. And now we have flow, and now we have flow built into the system where we can access it through the user interface of Dynamics 365. Well, the next logical step would be to actually replace the workflow engine with flow because it's more robust, and we don't have to write custom activities to do everything. So that's a possibility. I don't know if that's true or not. I have had zero interaction with the product team to ask about that. So, if anybody has any insights, I'd love to hear them. So that's a good question. Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay, plugins. So what is a plugin? A plugin is a compiled assembly. So it's a DLL. So you take the DLL, you register it using the plugin registration tool, and what that does is it adds to the system, and so that CRM executes your code just the same way that it does its code. So once a plugin has been registered within the system, it really doesn't know it's executing your stuff versus its stuff. In fact, Dynamics CRM/365 actually uses plugins to do their own work. For instance, the full name field on the contact is a combination of the first name, middle name, and last name. That's actually done with a plugin, if you didn't know that. So there's an internal plugin that actually does a lot of work, and you'll see it every now and then, and you mostly see the reason that you know these things is because you'll get an error from an internal plugin. It's literally called internal, and that's like, oh, they're using a plugin to do this work. So instead of building it into the system, they use their own extensibility model to actually do the work. And you'll notice that they are moving toward things like that. So for instance, these actions that you see, an action is a definition. So if I go back here to here, an action is nothing but a definition. So let's go back to that qualified lead that we talked about earlier. The qualified lead takes in a handful of parameters. Those parameters are defined by the developer. So you create an action just like you create a workflow. So it's technically a process. So you define that, what the name of it is. In this case, it's qualified lead. And then you define the parameters that go in and the parameters that come out. Then it is up to you, to the developer, to actually create a plugin that executes when the action is called within the system. So what we're doing here is we're actually adding what they call a message. Everything within CRM has a message. Create as a message, delete as a message, update as a message. Now qualified lead is a message. So what happens is you create a plugin that monitors qualified lead. When it sees that qualified lead come through the pipeline, your code gets executed by the system. So again, this is another way to define an access point that allows you to do something. You'll notice that the Dynamics teams are making very heavy use of this. If you have field service installed or you've looked at the field service demo, you will find hundreds, maybe not hundreds, but a lot of actions that do things behind the scenes. Okay, so again, that's done with plugins. Okay, so when writing plugins, in all honesty, this is my absolute last choice. Because it takes a lot to develop a plugin. Now, when I say a lot, I mean it takes a lot of experience to develop a plugin. You have to understand how the system works. You have to have a very good understanding of the development process. You have to make sure that the things that you are doing are not going to cause a problem, because it is possible for you to put in a plugin that will break and it will stop the operation from happening. And generally what happens with that is if your plugin breaks, it will stop things from happening. Like for instance, if you have a plugin that executes on a save operation, if your plugin throws an error, it'll pop up to the user. They can't hit save. They can't save a record. That's a bad thing, right? Okay. So again, I write plugins only when all the other things that we've discussed have been exhausted. So I can't use JavaScript. It's not appropriate. The other things like a Microsoft Flow is not a possibility. I don't have an existing custom workflow activity or anything else that will do it. And so, this is kind of the last resort. And I do this strictly because any piece of code you write is a piece of code you have to maintain. The cool thing about this is you can do just about anything you can imagine. And the even cooler thing is, as Microsoft enhances the platform, you have the ability to remove your custom code and replace it with code that's built into the system. I mentioned doing roll-ups before. So again, I still have code at customers that does specific types of roll-ups because they take into account a lot of factors that are not built in. But at the same time, I've actually removed plugins that did roll-up code or calculated fields because the built-in stuff is actually better than I had to write, and I don't have to maintain it anymore. Okay, does that make sense? Oops. So last thing here is some developer tools. So as always, download, understand, and play with the XRM Toolbox. So there's lots and lots and lots of plugins for it. This is the one that Tanguy, the other MVP from France, has created. And the most brilliant thing anybody has done in the CRM world, he actually created a toolkit that allowed people an open API to add their own tools to it. And the community has embraced that wholeheartedly. And there are now, like I said, I couldn't tell you, there's 50 or more plugins that do everything that you can imagine. Okay. There's also a thing, bad naming in my professional opinion, but there's XRM Toolkit. This is a developer tool that fits inside Visual Studio that allows you to do development of plugins, JavaScript, etc., that will actually allow you to push it and pull it from the system. So the way it would work is you create a new solution. It asks you what you would like to put in the solution. So, okay, you want JavaScript or plugins or images or whatever. It will extract that information or those things out of the system, create physical files within a solution object within Visual Studio, and then you can, once it's in Visual Studio, you can use source control on it, which is always a great thing because you will make a mistake with code sooner or later, and you need to be able to test stuff out. So once you modify it and you get to the testable state and everything's good, then you can use it to push it back into CRM, all without leaving Visual Studio. So he does that with JavaScript. I use all the time. He also has the ability to do that with plugins, so you can register the plugins inside Visual Studio without having to use the plugin registration tool. Now, Microsoft has a developer toolkit, and at this point it's a plugin for Visual Studio, which is why you see it at the Visual Studio Marketplace. I am not a fan of this strictly because it has been in a perpetual state of preview for years. They went for 2 or 3 years without updating it. Right now, it's been in preview for a year or almost a year, something like that, many months. So it kind of makes me very nervous that to have a tool that doesn't seem to ever be finished. And I don't like to have fights with my tools. External Toolkit I've used for years. It's a couple $100, but it's absolutely worth the effort, strictly because it just makes me so much more productive. So between the two, free versus supported, I would go with the External Toolkit. That's just my professional opinion. Okay. So next steps. As always, download and review the CRM/Dynamics 365 SDK. So this is the link to the Dynamics 365 SDK. There are ones for each of the versions that are out there. So just search for your specific version. The SDK is revisioned, just like a lot of things are at Microsoft. So you'll always find the last revision on the system. What I do is, I think I've described before, I actually keep all of my versions of the SDK in different folders. And I do that because sometimes they release tools that have bugs in them accidentally. And I like to go back to a previous version strictly because I can get to one that doesn't have a bug in it and keep you from working. Knowledge Bits is my free email delivery system for tips and tricks. So go sign up for those if you haven't already. I have free training guides and learning plans out there. And then, of course, go out to my YouTube channel and look at my previous webinars. So I've covered a lot of stuff. Like I said, we've got a huge update. I really can't emphasize enough how big of an update the July update is going to be. We'll have webinars from here to the end of the year, and I'm not exaggerating at all. We could literally talk every week about a new thing that they put in there. So going to be a lot of stuff to cover. Probably one of the first ones I'm going to do is totally kind of unrelated to the July update, but I'm actually going to talk about Flow. So they've added so I did a kind of an intro to Flow last year, but they've added enough stuff within the Flow itself that I think I may actually do do another one just to kind of catch up, quite honestly. So I may do that one next week if I have a chance. Okay. So Adima asks, is the SDK downward compatible? It's downward compatible. So you can use the Dynamics 365 SDK to access all the way down to Dynamics CRM 2011. In most cases, everything works just the way it should. If it doesn't work, it's a bug. So it's a problem. The tool asks, what's the best tool to publish and deploy some, not all components in a solution? That would be the XRM service, the XRM toolkit I mentioned earlier, which is that one there, the middle one. Jim asks, regarding updates, is there any dev pitfalls to avoid? Always use supported methods is the big one. So when you're using JavaScript, don't use things that are not documented. It will come back to bite you in the butt, just the way it works. So always use stuff. Now, that being said, the July update is going to introduce a tremendous number of JavaScript changes. And we're going to have to go along with it because probably in the next version, so I'm assuming that would be version 10, which is going to ship who knows when, they're going to deprecate a lot of the methods that we're using now. So they're not totally rewriting the XRM page model, but they're making it different. And they're doing that so that it supports all of the platforms. The way it works right now is not all JavaScript is supported on, say, the mobile client or the tablet client. And they're trying to get away from that. If you didn't know, they have this unified interface that they're coming up with. Now, it's going to take about a year to probably, I think, get out. The first version is going to ship in the business edition, which will be the new version that will ship sometime, I guess maybe in the fall or somewhere in there. So it's after the July update. So what they're doing is they're easing us into it. So they're coming out with a updated web client, and then they're coming out with this new unified interface that's going to be used by the mobile client and by the business edition. So the enterprise edition, which is what everybody has right now, will not get the update until later. And that's strictly because of testing, because we have a lot to do. But part of this, getting everything over to this unified interface, is what this means is every single view of Dynamics 365, no matter the platform, is going to be using a singular interface. Right now, we actually have three. We have the web client, the mobile client, and the interactive service hub. So what they're doing is they're taking concepts and components out of the interactive service hub and making them used or implementing them throughout the system. So that's what they're doing. So at some point, I'm assuming next year maybe, unknown as to the exact time frame when it's going to finish shipping, we'll have the ability to have a singular interface that looks and acts the same on all device platforms, no matter the device. So if you're on the web, it shows you one way. The way that they kind of been showing it, I think you may have seen some screenshots, is they'll just start reducing the size of the window, and it will just start hiding things underneath the ellipsis button and hide it. Next thing you know, when you get down small enough, all of a sudden the mobile device scheme pops up. So that's how that's working. So there are going to be some changes to that. It's going to be really, hopefully, just a search and replace operation. That's where things like the XRM Toolkit come in to play, because we can do it inside of Visual Studio, and that's just a much better development environment to work with. So hopefully, that's not going to be a big deal. But other than that, anytime they do an upgrade, you still have to go through testing. Strictly because things do change. Sometimes they know what they changed, sometimes they don't know what they changed. So we'll have to see how that works out. The tool asks, can you call a workflow / plugin / action from JavaScript? Absolutely, you can. There are several examples out there. Just do a search for one of those phrases and you'll find it. It's just preparing the call and then executing it. That's all it is. Debbie asked, is the workflow tool going to use the new drag and drop? That's what we were talking about earlier. Debbie, I don't know if they're going to modify the existing workflow tool or if they're just going to start using Flow. I mean, it's anybody's guess at this point. I would hope that they would still keep it around, but it's going to take major changes. But quite honestly, it's the last piece that they have. So, but it's a lot of work. And quite honestly, I think the big thing is they have to worry about converting things. That's what the problem is. So some of these things are not big to convert, but if you've ever exported out your solution and opened up opened up the customization file and looked at the XML that makes up the workflow, it's quite complicated. Okay. Ben asked about XRM Toolkit using in the free pared down version of Visual Studio. So, Ben, you have to have the Community Edition. That's the only one that supports plugins, which is what the XRM Toolkit is. And I have not tried it, but it should work. But I would just send an email to support at xrmtoolkit.com and ask Steve what if it does. I think it does, though. Harinder says he finds it difficult to work with web resources. That's why we use the XRM Toolkit. Like I said, it opens up inside of Visual Studio, so you're actually working with a real code tool. So that's what I use, and again, that's what I recommend. Okay. So, what questions did we not get covered today? Anything? Irvin was talking about using React.js and a few other things to build UIs. You can use things like that to build a custom UI, but the big thing to remember is anytime you have a different type of UI, if you don't style it exactly the same as Dynamics 365, you're going to create confusion of the users. So we all have to create things sooner or later like that, depending on the complexity of the solution. I think that's becoming more and more popular is to do something like that rather than just try to do straight HTML JavaScript stuff. Anytime you have a framework, it's really good. But the big problem is not everybody is that class or that level of developer. I know I'm actually not. That's more of a pure web JavaScript thing, and that's just quite honestly not me. Okay. What else we got? Anything new? Okay. Well, I think that is it.